Hello and welcome to Solving the Occasionally Connected App Problem. I'm going to go ahead now and pass the stage over to Phil, and he's going to tell you all about Telerik Data Storage for Windows 8.
Thank you, Michael.
Now let's look at the Telerik Data Storage for Windows 8. If you're a Windows 8 developer, you already know that storage options are limited in the Windows 8 environment. This is for a number of reasons, one being, of course, the multiple device architectures you can deploy Windows 8 apps onto, but also the sandbox security level. So there's no direct access to SQL Server from a Windows 8 modern app. Local and roaming data is a possibility, but you have some very strict size limitations. Really, you're looking at 8K for a setting, 64K for composite settings, and that's really not enough to store real meaningful data. It's perfect for storing application settings and user preferences and things like that, but not when you're talking about data for your application. File storage is limited. You have XML or JSON essentially, and whereas those are very usable, you're still looking at some difficulty when you're trying to do relational lookups or joins and things of that nature. So the storage isn't a problem. Getting it out isn't so much of a problem, especially with JSON.NET, but certainly when you want to do some advanced relational operations, it becomes very, very difficult. Most applications rely on remote data access. If you are entirely dependent on remote data access and you don't have a data connection, then your app is basically crippled. So you really need to have some local storage. What we've done is we've developed the Telerik Data Storage for Windows 8. Now this is a native SQLite wrapper. So we take all the goodness of SQLite. So it'll run on ARM, it'll run on Wintel devices. It's fully relational. You get the power of queries and indexes and everything else, and we've made it simple to use. So we've wrapped up all of the SQLite stuff into a very, very clean interface that you can use from either C# or JavaScript. You can use standard SQL queries and everything else. We'll get into that shortly, but basically all you need to worry about is how you develop that next hot app, right? Again, whether it's line of business, whether it's a game, whatever your goal is, you focus on delivering business value. Let us focus on the plumbing, and you can take advantage and very simply get some local data storage. So what are some of the features? Well, as I've already said, it's based on SQLite. So you get the relational data store out of the box. It's been around for a long time. We didn't reinvent the wheel. We said, hey, what works really well on the Windows 8 devices? SQLite. Let's make that even easier to use. From a query standpoint, you get linked to SQL if you're doing XAML, C#. We wrote a Fluent API for you if you're in HTML WinJS side of the house. You can certainly call all of the SQL commands using strings, passing it in. You get the power of indices for fast retrieval. So of course, single or multi-column indices, as well as specifying unique. We've created a context class for you in the XAML world, and this follows a very straightforward unit of work pattern. The pattern has been around for a long time. We certainly did not create the pattern. We're leveraging it to make it a cleaner implementation. And then also on the XAML side, you get data annotation support. So what are the basics? Well, there's some initial setup you need to do. Obviously, you need to create your app. If you're doing a XAML app, then XAML. If HTML, HTML. You then need to add the Telerik references. Telerik UI for Windows 8, either XAML or HTML. And then you add a Telerik Data Storage for Windows 8.1, again, XAML or HTML. Now, we do have a version that works with 8.0, but we are moving forward with all new features in 8.1. The adoption rate for 8.1, for those who've adopted Windows 8, is astronomically high. So there's not a whole lot of benefit to moving the Windows 8 story forward when so many users, and a vast majority, are on Windows 8.1. But if you do need to create a Windows 8 app, we do have a Windows 8 version available as well. Another thing you have to remember is to select the target CPU type. So when you add the references, initially you're going to get a whole lot of red and unable to build. That's because you need to specify whether you're deploying to ARM, x64, or x86. Now this isn't something that we've brought forward. It's just the way SQLite works. You have to pick the right deployment mechanism and use different C++ and COM libraries. And so all we need to do is make sure you pick the right deployment so we are pulling in the right libraries into Visual Studio and your project. You then create the models and you create the database and you're off to the races. Now, a couple points to ponder or best practices. Use data annotations, such as key to indicate which field is the primary key. Database generated for auto-incremented fields. Save changes often. Anytime that you make a change to the context, it's actually stored in a cache. It makes it very fast to work with, but we don't automatically save it. You need to specifically call save changes. And then for the database connections themselves, this is nothing new. Open late, close fast. SQLite leverages all kinds of COM goo. We want to make sure that your application is fast and furious. So open late, close fast. All right, that being said, let's get into some code. Okay, we don't have a whole lot of time, so let me create a very simple app. I've got a data grid on here. I've got a check status button, a create database, a delete data, a sync, and a refresh. So let's get down to brass tacks. I've got a new project here. I've copied in some of the plumbing so you didn't have to see me type. I've added my two references, Telerik Data Storage for Windows 8.1, of course XAML because I'm in a XAML project, Telerik UI for Windows 8.1. I then went into Build, Configuration Manager, and selected x86. You would obviously select the one that matches your deployment target. I just chose x86 so we get some benefit of the designer. So I've already copied in all the XAML for the main page, and then in my code behind, now I should be using MVVM, but I wanted to keep this as simple as possible. So I've just got some event handlers for the clicks, and I'm calling into a DB helpers class. Alright, so let's take a look at the models and how we do that. So I have an addresses and I have contacts. Couple key things I want to point out, no pun intended. So your primary key you want to specify with the key attribute, and if you want it to be an identity, then you want to put database generated with the database generation option .identity there. Contacts, same thing. I have a little more here. I've got index for select by name, so I've got a multi-column index here that has first name and last name. We then say whether we want ascending or descending, and then the order. So I want last name to be first in the index, and then first name is second in the index. I then have an index for select by age, and then I have an address foreign key ID, and then I have this synced property down here. Now this is going to tell me whether or not this individual record has been synced with our service that we're going to send the data to. So we capture things locally, we then send it up. So let's look at the DB helpers class. When we create a new context object, it's going to look to see if the database exists that we are trying to wrap with the context, and if it doesn't, it'll create it. So we have to have a name as well as a location. We have many options here. So if we go into location, you see we have full path, local, roaming, and temporary. Now we're just going to use local. So let's first check to see if the database exists. Now to check to see if a database exists, we first create a context. Unfortunately, creating the context creates the database file. So what we're really checking to see is if our schema exists within the database file. So we set the context to the new context of the DB name and the locations. So then we simply want to query the database to see if we have records in the tables that we care about. So this isn't the perfect solution, but it's kind of the way you have to do things with SQLite. I say it doesn't exist, in other words, it exists equals false. I then select all from context and select all from addresses. Now let's look at the syntax because this is going to be a common thing that we do. So we have the context, get, contacts. So this is the type that we want to get, and it matches our entity class. And then we have a query. We can also do get all, which would get everything, and then we can use link because get all actually returns an iQueryable. But we just simply want to check to see if there's at least one contact in and at least one address in. Now this will change based on your rules. I know that for me to have a valid database, I have at least one contact and one address in there. If the table doesn't exist yet, it'll throw an exception, and we just ignore the exception, we close the database, and then we return whether it exists or not. Alright, now that we know whether or not it exists, let's create the database Well, technically it's already created as soon as we make a new context. Let's add the records to start it off. So we go down here to create database, and let me just paste it in again, and let's look at this code. So the first thing we want to do is check to make sure that the records are already in there. If they are, we just go ahead and return. We create a new context. Well, we use the same context, but we open it up again, and then we are just going to call myContext.insert. Now this is strongly typed, so we want to insert addresses and then the object that we're going to insert. So we dynamically create a new address class and we insert it. Now after we get done with the inserting, we then call save changes. This persisted into the database. I then go through and pull the addresses out so I can then assign the foreign key assignment into each of the contexts. Now how you add the relations in is going to depend again upon your business rules. This is just something quick and dirty so we get a demo. At the end of this process, again we call save changes and then we close the database. Alright, now that we have some data in our database, we want to get it out and we want to display it in the grid. Real quick here, we check to make sure the database already exists. Reopen the context. We get all contexts, order by last name, then by first name, and then we return the list. So now we're actually ready to run the code, and we want to check to make sure the database exists. It doesn't, so then we want to create the database. It now exists, so let's refresh the data. And we have a grid filled with data that isn't synced. So going back into the code, let's look at the sync data with service call. Again, we check to make sure the database exists, and then we want to get all of the unsynced records. So we reopen the context, and then we see get all contexts where the synced value does not equal true. We would then send those records off to some service. We would get the updated info. We then want to execute a scalar. Get scalar on context, update context, set synced equals 1 or true, save changes, close the database. So we run this, and then we sync it, and then refresh. We see that everything is synced. Alright, that was a very quick lap around the data storage. For a much deeper dive, you can get the data storage demo app. The way to get that is log into your account on Telerik.com, go to products and subscriptions, DevCraft Ultimate or DevCraft Complete, download installer and other resources, then go to browse all product files for UI for Windows 8 XAML or UI for Windows 8 HTML, and then when you get to the product file page, you'll see demos and sample applications, and you can get the XAML data storage demo or the HTML storage demo. Alright, some additional resources. So if you want to find help on any of our products, go to docs.telerik.com. Documentation, demos, and forums at telerik.com/support. And then specific information on the data storage for Windows 8.1. From the XAML side, bit.ly/win8ds-XAML. You can also get the HTML documentation at bit.ly win8ds-HTML. And now I'd like to bring Michael Crump up to the stage. Michael?
Thank you, Phil. Let's go ahead and take a look at Telerik Data Storage and cloud-powered controls for Windows Phone. So Phil covered data storage in great detail, but just as a reminder, I'd like to take a moment to recap a couple of key points. So our data storage implementation provides users with local database support backed with fast and serverless engine of SQLite. With Telerik's data storage solution, developers can take advantage of relational databases for processing data in their Windows Phone 8 apps as well as Windows 8 and 8.1. The data storage engine uses Link to SQLite extensions, which allows developers to create relational databases with tables that map to plain old CLR object entities, and it's up to the end users to choose the way to interact with our data storage engine. The developer is free to use either standard link queries or raw SQL queries. As expected with any type of data storage, full CRUD operations exist. Our cloud-powered components for Windows Phone enables you to extend your Windows Phone applications with common cloud-related scenarios without having to write the back-end service yourself. We have controls available that cover some common scenarios like user authentication, user registration, picture upload, picture browsing, and more. Finally, the Cloud Data Sync mechanism allows you to store cloud objects in the local storage of your device and makes sure that both the local and cloud storages are in sync. The mechanism is integrated with Telerik's own backend services as well as Azure mobile services. Let's go ahead now and take a look at a demo of Telerik Data Storage and cloud-powered controls for Windows Phone 8. Let's begin by taking a look at the data storage first. So I've went ahead and I've created an application and I'm going to walk through adding data storage to this Windows Phone app. I've added in references to telerik.storage.extensions to telerik.storage_WP. I've also added in the telerik.windows.controls.data as well as primitives and core. I'll be using those for the RAD databound list box that is shown here where my mouse cursor is. From there, I've set up a couple of classes which we'll examine in just a moment, but for now, let's go ahead and take a look at the actual XAML that I have already created. And inside of our grid, you can see that I'm using Telerik's RAD databound list box to actually display the data. So I've set an empty content for no cars to display, and then I've set up an item template as well as a data template with a simple stack panel. Inside of that stack panel, I've given it a rectangle just so we can get a nice look and feel. This is going to be a red rectangle because it's going to be using the phone accent brush. And then I'm going to be binding to the model and then just a space in between, and then finally the name. We'll close our tags. The only other thing that I've added is a couple of different menu items. So I have one for creating, adding, deleting, updating, viewing cars, and viewing owners. So let's go ahead now that we've seen our UI and let's take a look at our classes. We'll begin with the car owner. So with the car owner, you can see that I'm using data annotations, and I'm also using data annotations.schema. So I have a key and then database generated option.identity, and then I have an owner ID as well as a name. I've also set up a car class, and this obviously has the same sort of thing with the key and database generated option.identity. We have a long for a car ID, we have a model, we have a date time for a year of model, a string for a registration number, and then finally an owner foreign key just named owner FK. So let's begin by going into our main page.xaml.cs and let's build out our first app. So we're going to need to begin by setting up the actual context of this application. So I'm going to be using telerik.storage.extensions.context, and I'll just give this the name of context. Underneath my initialized component, I'm going to drop in context equals new context, and then I'm just going to give this a name. I'm just going to give this the name of cars db demo 0. And then under our main page loaded event, I'm going to call a method called display cars and owners. So you'll see that the display cars and owners method already exists. And so I can actually scroll down and I'm just going to paste in a snippet here. And from here we're going to join two tables. So we're going to do var cars and owners from items in context.getAll cars, which is our car class, join owner in context.getAll car owner, own the item dot foreign key equals owner dot owner ID. We're going to select a new owner dot owner ID, owner name, model, and then the year of model. And if we have a count that's greater than 1, which means we have more than one item, then I'm just going to set the item source to our RAD databound list box to cars and owners. So let's scroll back up, and now we'll take a look at adding in our own create click event handler. So I'm going to paste in some code here, and you'll see that what we're doing is we're going ahead and adding in context.insert car owner, and we're adding in 5 different car owner names. We're also going to add in some different types of cars from a BMW to a Bentley to a Cadillac, as well as set the owner foreign key to 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Once we've done that, we can call context.saveChanges, and then we're going to call our method called display cars and owners. Let's go ahead and scroll down to our own add click event handler, and let's look at what it would take to add just one record. So in order to add one record, I could simply just do a var car equals new car, give it a model, give it a registration number, and then a year of model, and then the owner foreign key. We could insert that car here, call our save changes like we have been doing, and then finally we just call display cars and owners to update our screen. Deleting a record is fairly simple and straightforward, where we can select var target equals context.getAll cars, where car is equal to car.owner foreign key equals 3.first or default. Then we can delete that car. Again, we save the changes and we're going to display the cars and owners. If we wanted to update one, we could again simply drop in this piece of code where we do a var person and a context.getAll, and we get the car owner, or the car owner dot owner ID is equal to 5, and then we're just getting a first or default. We're going to set that name. Before this was Michael Crump, now it's called Ridley Crump. And then context.update car owner, passing in the person. We're going to call save changes method, and then we're going to display cars and owners. Again, from here, if we wanted to, as I said in the slides, we could call this line of code and we could update this car owner from Michael Crump to maybe say Amanda Crump. And then we would finally call context.getScalar int and then the query. Okay, so that's just an example of calling the onUpdate. We have one more button that we haven't wrote code for yet, and that's just to display the cars. And in this sample, it will just return all of the cars that we have listed. So we can do a var cars equals from item in context.getAll car, select items. We're going to make sure that we have at least one, and then we'll set the item source to cars. And before we leave and take a look at the demo on our own navigated from, we're going to simply call context.closeDatabase. And you're going to want to make sure that you close out of the database when you are finished using it. So let's go ahead and let's go back to our application and let's run it. So we can see we have no cars to display. I'm going to go ahead and hit the create button. So I've hit the create button and you can see that we have 5 items listed in here so far. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to add one additional item. So I've added a Corvette with my name to it. Now I'll go ahead and delete one. So I've deleted one item, so we're back to 5 items. I'm going to click update. So now the Cadillac and the Corvette, they did belong to Michael Crump and now they belong to Ridley Crump. And I could obviously use link to just view the cars only, or I could call that same command to view the cars and the owners. So that's a demo of data storage in Windows Phone 8. Let's take a look now at the cloud-powered controls in Windows Phone 8. So taking a look now at the cloud-powered controls, I wanted to go ahead and bring up a real-world application that I have been building on the blogs and show you exactly how we can integrate the cloud controls into an app. So underneath our appointment tracker, you'll see we have references, and then we have references to newtonsoft.json, telerik.everlive.sdk, telerik.windows.controls.cloud, as well as you'll see 2 other ones that end with .core.cloud and .core.cloud.everlive. There is some other components that I have added, and that is simply because I use those throughout the application. But those are the components that you'll want to add to start using some of our cloud components. With that being said, I have modified my WM app manifest to point to the login screen, which is what we're on right now, to begin showing you how to use their cloud component controls. So in order to actually create this UI, you would think you may need a text block and then a text box and some other components in order to create this user interface. And that is absolutely not the case at all. The only thing that you'll need to do here is you'll need to add in Telerik Cloud Controls, add in the XML namespace. As you can see, that maps to telerik.windows.controls.cloud, and then the assembly being telerik.windows.controls.cloud. And then once you do that, you can give it a name if you would like, and then you would want to add in a successful navigation URI as well as a register navigation URI. And I went ahead and I've commented out the login providers, but if you want to add in, say for example, Facebook or Google Plus, or maybe even Live ID, you could do those by simply adding in the different types of login providers. Obviously, you'll need to provide your client ID as well as your client secret. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm just going to comment those back out, and we'll go back to our project and we'll double click on registration. In order to click and create this registration screen, all that we actually had to do was create Telerik Cloud and then rad cloud registration. I'm giving it a registration failed method and then a registration success method. So you can see that automatically keys in our username, password, a repeat password, as well as an email, and then a sign up screen. So if we look at the code behind file for this page, you'll see that on success, it's just going to navigate to views/appointment.xaml. And if we have a registration error, then it's just going to use async and await to show us that the registration failed. So if you're wondering how all of this is wired up inside of the app.xaml.cs, if we scroll down just a little bit, you'll see that we have an initialized provider, and this passes in an Everlive provider settings, then passes in the API key, and then cloud provider.init passing in the settings. Obviously, we have templates for this as well, so you could right click and you could select add new project, and you can see that we have a variety of different templates for you to use here. So with that being said, let's go ahead and let's run this application and let's create a new user, and then we'll check our backend services to make sure that it was added successfully. So I'm going to click on our appointment tracker. I'm going to create an account, and we'll just give this a very easy username and password, and then we'll click on sign up. So now you can see we are signed up, we are inside of the application. Let's switch over now to our backend services, and here we are inside of the Telerik platform, and we'll just go ahead and click on the refresh button here, and you can see that our username of ASDF has been added to our table for us. So that's just some of the power that comes with the cloud powered controls by Telerik. So as always, the starting point for Telerik UI for Windows Phone 8 is simply by navigating to telerik.com/products/windows-phone.aspx, and you can learn more about Telerik Data Storage for Windows Phone 8 once you land on our home page. Obviously, you can check out the Telerik cloud-powered controls for Windows Phone 8 by going to bit.ly/cloud-powered-WP. And if you would like to look at the series more in depth on building an appointment tracking app using our cloud-powered controls, then you could do that by going to bit.ly/APPT-tracking-WP. So thank you for taking the time to listen. Stay tuned for the next session, which will be starting shortly.